time for a June wrap up. So June was actually a really good reading month for me. I ended up reading 9 books this month. I'm literally shocked. I definitely wasn't expecting to read this many books this month. I didn't necessarily set out to do it. I didn't, go out of my way to do it. It's just what ended up happening. And so because I read 9 books this month, that puts me at 41 books for the year. So I am 9 books away from hitting my 50 book goal. And it feels really good because I'm definitely ahead of where I was last year. Like last year, I just barely hit my 50 book goal, and now it's like July and I'm only 9 books away, so I feel really good about that. Also, this month ended up being a really good reading month just in general. I feel like most of the books I read got either a 4 or 5 stars, which is like really good because this year I've definitely been more of a critical reader and reviewer, and that's meant that a lot of the books that I've read for the entire year have been rated 1, 2, or 3 stars. So to have like an entire month just filled with amazing books, it feels so good. So the first book that I read this month was She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This was a really fun, like, enemies to lovers or rivals to lovers YA contemporary romance. It was so cute. I loved it. And it also had a lot to do with like sports, which I'm not a big sports person. I do like watching baseball, but overall, I did a lot of sports as a kid. I just, it really burned me out. So now that I'm an adult, I am not super into sports, especially basketball. I hate basketball. Literally my least favorite sport next to soccer. But basketball, I really have a beef with. Anyway, all that to say is that She Drives Me Crazy has a lot to do with basketball. The main character is a basketball player and her rival is this cheerleader, and they've definitely had some negative interactions in the past. So the main character doesn't like the love interest doesn't really like the main character. However, by circumstance, they have to come together and kind of fake date, which is so much fun. I love fake dating tropes, and I felt like this one was done really well. So if you're looking for a really fun, queer, summer romance kind of book, She Drives Me Crazy is absolutely perfect for you. Also, the audiobook is really good. The next book that I read in June was a fantasy book, and that was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faizal, and I read this both physically and as an audiobook, and it was so much fun, such a great experience. I loved this book so much. It's definitely one of my new favorites. And basically this book is about Zafira, and she is a hunter, and she has always disguised herself while doing her hunting thing. However, Nasir, the Prince of Death, is kind of sent after her to come find her, but he doesn't know that she's a girl, and so if her cover gets blown, then everything that she's ever done is going to be kind of for nothing. So this book does kind of end up being a little bit of an enemies to lovers situation, and I just ate it up. I loved the romance. I loved the entire like plot. The characterization was fun. The character dynamics were so interesting and just kept me wanting to read constantly. Like, I finished this book so late at night. I could not sleep. I was like, I need to finish this book immediately. I need to know what happens. And it was so worth it. The way that Hafsa Faizal crafted this fantasy world was so interesting and so refreshing. I feel like I've definitely read a lot of fantasy books recently by people of color, by authors of color, and they've just been so refreshing. They've just been so different and unique, and a really good change of pace from like the typical YA fantasy. So I really appreciated that, and like I said, the writing was absolutely gorgeous. Like, Hafsa Faizal knows how to put a sentence together and make it sound beautiful and gorgeous, and like I want to tattoo it all over my body. And I was super worried recently that I was kind of like losing interest in YA fantasy, but this book reminded me of why I love YA fantasy so much, why I love reading these kinds of books, and I'm definitely really grateful for that because I cannot wait to read the sequel, and it definitely reignited my love for fantasy. And if you haven't read this book, please go read it. It's so interesting. I really love the romance in this book. I just like completely died for it. It was so good. and you're not going to regret it. Just pick it up, read it. It's amazing. The audiobook is also really good. So any way that you can pick this book up, it's going to be amazing. The next book is another one with a really great romance that I absolutely loved, and that was One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Oh my gosh, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I loved it. So if you've been watching my channel for, I want to say maybe a year or so, you know I do not like Red, White, and Royal Blue. I just do not like that book. When I initially read it, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but since my rating system has changed, I changed it to a 2 out of 5 stars. I really did not like that book, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but I just want to make this point that like I really didn't like that book. I had been super excited for it. I literally bought it the day it came out, and then I was majorly disappointed by it. However, I wanted to give One Last Stop a chance because I'm like, this is sapphic, this is totally different than Red, White, and Royal Blue. I want to give this author another shot. So despite me rating Red, White, and Royal Blue 2 out of 5 stars and really hating it, I was able to pick up One Last Stop because I had like an advanced reader's audiobook, I guess. I don't know what those are called. I get it because I'm a partner with Libro FM, so I'm able to get like advanced audiobooks. Anyway, I read it as an audiobook and I loved it so much. The writing had improved, the characterization was improved, the plot was improved. There were definitely still some issues that were left over from Red, White, and Royal Blue. First of all, there was still the third person perspective, which I do not like. If it's not going to be utilized in like a multi-perspective sort of way, I don't mind if a book is third person if we're going to have, you know, 3 perspectives. But if we're only having 1 perspective, I really don't like third person perspective. It's just like, it doesn't work for me. And I'd rather it just be first person, especially if it's going to be a contemporary romance. I felt like it worked a little bit better in One Last Stop because it did have that historical aspect, but as a general rule, I do not like third person point of view in contemporary romance. It just doesn't work for me. And then there was also a huge pacing issue, which was, you know, another issue that I had with Red, White, and Royal Blue. The pacing of the story is just not there. There would be parts within the book where we would be in a scene and then just randomly into another just completely different scene with no real transition. And it felt very jarring. Like I was like, oh, this scene was very short and ended so awkwardly. Why did they write it like that? It just didn't make sense to me. So that was also an issue within One Last Stop. I feel like if those 2 things had been different, I might have rated this a 5 out of 5 stars because I really, really liked this book. I loved the historical aspect. I loved the romance. I felt like the characters had a lot of real chemistry, and you know, it was nice to see this book and not have like some tropes that were just like misused in the way that Red, White, and Royal Blue had tropes that were misused. Yes, I'm looking at you, enemies to lovers that wasn't even actually enemies to lovers. But otherwise, I loved this book so much. Basically, it's about this girl named August, and she has just moved to New York, and she ends up meeting this very strange and enigmatic girl on the subway. And they end up sparking a friendship, a relationship, and things start to come to light about this girl that August never really expected. So I really love this book, and if you haven't read it, I 100% recommend that you read it. The audiobook is amazing. It literally just sucked me in. I read it so fast, and it was just so good. I loved it so much. So if you were like me and you didn't really like Red, White, and Royal Blue, give One Last Stop a chance. I promise it's worth it. The next book that I read was a total spur of the moment decision. I didn't even like have this book on my radar, but then I started to see quite a few tweets about this book, and I was like, ooh, this looks really interesting, so I want to read it. It also has like, you know, a trans main character. It's written by a trans author, so I was super excited to read it, and that was The Witch King by H.E. Edgman, and I give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. It was so much fun. It's perfect for fans of, say, Julie Kagawa or Holly Black or even maybe Cassandra Clare. Like, It's totally that kind of vibe, but it's even better because it's like super diverse. It has a trans main character, and I loved the way that the author was able to incorporate the character's transness within not only the characterization but also the plot. It worked so perfectly, and I loved it. It was so refreshing to read. Like I said with We Hunt the Flame, it's just so nice to read like diverse fantasy. It's so much fun. I really enjoyed it so much. I cannot stop saying enough good things about it. I feel like the only negative thing that I had to say about this book was that some of the aspects of it didn't feel totally polished, totally like solid in a way. It just didn't feel like everything had been fleshed out enough. And it was mostly like the fantasy elements that didn't feel fleshed out enough. I feel like the characters were definitely there and the relationships were really well done, but it was just the fantasy world building aspects that I was a little fuzzy on, that just didn't feel like they were totally put together in like a strong foundational way. So that was kind of what took the 1 star off of my rating. But I mean, 4 to 5 stars is an amazing rating. I absolutely loved it, as you can tell. I cannot stop gushing about it. I've literally told everybody to read this book. I'm obsessed. So basically we're following the character Wyatt, and he has left his like fantasy world, his like fave kingdom, and he and I guess we should start off by saying that he's actually a witch. He's not like a fairy or a fae. And witches within that society are and witches in this society are looked down upon, so Wyatt has not really had a very good deal of it. And also he used to be betrothed to the fae prince, and now since he's run away, he's kind of trying to be in hiding. He's like not really wanting to be part of this society anymore. And then one day the fae prince comes and finds him and is like, hey, we're still betrothed, you have to come back home and we need to get married. And Wyatt is like, no thank you, don't want that. I literally just like ran away. I clearly don't want to marry you. And so it's like such a cool and interesting setup for like a fantasy book. And it's not necessarily like the most groundbreaking setup for a fantasy book, but I do love just like the plot where it's like the fae person, or like just, you know, like the fantasy person leaves the fantasy world and goes into the real world to go into hiding, and then is like, oh, I have to go back to the fantasy world. So I love that kind of premise. I think it's so fun, and this book definitely did it really well. I loved Wyatt as a main character. He was so funny, so dry, and he definitely had so many layers to him as a character, and it was really fun to kind of get to see those layers pulled back throughout the entire story. So yeah, if you're looking for a fantasy book with a trans main character with a really diverse cast, I 100% recommend The Witch King. It was so good, so much fun, and just really funny. Like, it was definitely a very humorous fantasy novel. The next book I read was another one that was kind of just like a spur of the moment. I'm in the car, I have like a couple of hours to spare, so I'm gonna read this book really fast. And that was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I was shocked that I liked this book. I have an interesting history with John Green, mainly because when I was like back in high school, I used to watch Vlogbrothers all the time. I thought they were so funny. I loved their videos, so much fun. I love John Green, I love Hank Green, I love them as people. I think they're so much fun. So I was like, I love Vlogbrothers. Like, this is back in the day. I love Vlogbrothers. I want to read John Green's books. And so I tried to read John Green's books, and I hated most of them. Like, I would attempt to start, like, say, Looking for Alaska or An Abundance of Catherines or whatever. I hated those books so much. I could not finish them. The only one I was able to finish was The Fault in Our Stars, and I actually really enjoyed that book. I have a lot of good memories of that book, but even still, I don't know if I truly liked it or if I liked it because I wanted to like a John Green book. I don't know. I feel like the only way I could tell would be if I wanted to reread The Fault in Our Stars, which maybe I'll do that at some point, but for now, I don't really know if I genuinely liked it or not. However, I think actually this book I got an advanced audiobook as well, so that might have been the reason why I picked it up. but I was like, ooh, I kind of want to read this. It's nonfiction. I love John Green as a person, so I figure I'll like his nonfiction. And I did. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book so much. It spoke to my soul. It was so interesting. Every single essay within this book was like a 10 out of 10, amazing, hit out the ballpark, so good. There was not one essay that was a flop in this entire book. I will say that my favorite essay within this book is the one on Diet Dr. Pepper, because it's John Green's favorite soda and it's also my favorite soda. So I love Diet Dr. Pepper. I've loved it ever since, I want to say probably like 8th or 9th grade, when Nick Jonas said that he liked Diet Dr. Pepper. It became my favorite soda as well. So I really loved that chapter in this book. It was so much fun. And I just love John Green's writing voice. It was so interesting, and it's totally like the way that he talks, or the way that he was on Vlogbrothers or like on TikTok or whatever. It's just, it's him 100%. And basically this entire collection is just essays about like the entire spectrum of human experience. It's very, very hopeful. It's very positive. I really enjoyed it, and if you're looking for something to kind of pick you up out of a reading slump, or just pick you up out of a life slump, I 100% recommend this book. It was so much fun, and I'm so glad that I have the physical copy. And you know, I went back to Walmart because the first time I saw it at Walmart, I picked it up and I was like, I'm not gonna get it, I already read it. And then I saw it again and I was like, you know what? You loved this book so much, you need to own it. So I have it, and it's also signed. We love that. And I also really loved it mainly because in the book he talks about how much he likes signing pages for books. So many of his books are just like signed by the author or signed edition. So I thought that that was kind of cool, and it just definitely fit with this book. So if you're looking for a fun nonfiction book to read that isn't super difficult to get into, I 100% recommend this book. The next book is another fantasy book that I absolutely fell in love with, and that is The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And I gave this a, I want to say a 5 out of 5 stars. I just have to check really quick. Yes, I did. I loved this book. I've realized that I really like low fantasy that's super quiet, not like a huge sprawling fantasy world. I really enjoy these kind of books. So it's books like The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, or it's books like The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. Like, those are so low fantasy, but they're so much fun. They're so romantic, so beautiful, and it's like the exact kind of fantasy book that I really want to read. And they almost kind of read like fairy tales in a way, because they feel like they're set within our world, but they also have magic in them. But I wouldn't call them like an urban fantasy or a contemporary fantasy, or even really a historical fantasy. I wouldn't even call it that. It's just like a fairy tale-esque fantasy novel. It's so beautiful, and this one really hit it out of the ballpark for me. I loved it so much. It was so romantic, and I loved the main character. And I think I mentioned this in one of my updates, that I was like, this main character feels like a Not Like Other Girls character, or like a Manic Pixie Dream Girl character, but I love her to death. I would die for her. She's like in love with like rocks and with beetles, and she's like super quirky and weird, and like doesn't know like social norms, and to some people she's a little annoying, and she has these powers that she can't really control. And I just like related to her on such like a deep and personal level, because I'm like, I feel like this is how I am to other people. Like, this is how other people view me, as like kind of annoying, and I have like these really weird interests that nobody ever wants to talk to me about. And that's totally true for the main character as well. And I loved her. She was just so sweet and soft, and I just, I fell in love. But this book definitely has a lot of drama as well. Like, the main character's, what would you call her? I think it's technically her aunt or her cousin. I think it's her cousin. So basically her cousin by marriage like totally hates her guts, like just like absolutely hates her for no goddamn reason. And I'm just like, I want to murder this bitch. I want to murder her so bad. Sorry, YouTube. I don't want to get demonetized. I just did not like this character. She deserves nothing. She deserves absolutely nothing. So basically this book is set during the grand season, which is when all of like the eligible ladies are picked up by all the eligible men and they end up getting married, and it's, you know, just whatever. So this year is Nina's debut, and she ends up meeting Hector, whom she just like immediately falls in love with. She is obsessed with him. She's totally enamored by him in a really cute way. It's not like in a weird, like, you know, stalkery way. She's just like super sweet and naive. And Hector's a little bit older than she is, but he has some secrets that Nina has no idea about. He has some ties to some people that she knows, and it's a big secret, and so there's definitely a lot of tension and drama there. I loved this book. I cannot stop saying enough good things about this book. If you haven't read it, if you're interested in it, please go read it. It's amazing, iconic, the writing is gorgeous. Silvia Moreno Garcia, I absolutely love this book so much. Like, I liked Mexican Gothic, that was fun, 4 out of 5 stars. But the beautiful ones, this is it. This is the one that I could reread immediately. The next book was another really fun fantasy romance, and that was Music of the Night by Angela J. Ford. And I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I absolutely fell in love with it. It was so cute, gorgeous, sweeping, beautiful. The writing was so poetic and beautiful, and I feel like if you're going to go into this book, you should probably know whether you like poetic language, whether you like almost purple prose. It was very flowery, but not in a way that felt like it was too much, like it was gratuitous. It just felt like it was natural, like it just fit the story so perfectly. It's also a super short fantasy book, so it's just kind of like a little snippet of a fantasy. And it's also a Phantom of the Opera retelling, which we love. I've been reading so many Phantom of the Opera retellings this year, and this one is by far my favorite. It's definitely different than the other ones that I've read, and you should also go into this knowing that it is an adult fantasy book, so there are adult sexual scenes in it, so be aware of that. I really liked the scenes. I thought that they were done really well. I'm kind of picky with how they're written. Sometimes I am fine with like a sexy scene. Other times they're written so poorly that it just like is weird and awkward. So I'm very picky with how those scenes are written. But these ones were so good, and it definitely fit the narrative of the story, and I completely bought the relationship between these two main characters. The romance was there, the chemistry was there. I lived for it so much. I 100% recommend this if you're looking for a romantic, sexy Phantom of the Opera retelling. The next book is easily one of my new favorites of all time, and that is Beach Read by Emily Henry. I don't even know what to say about this book. This book broke me. It broke me in such a personal way that I just had to give it 5 out of 5 stars. I cried so much while reading this book and listening to folklore. Like, I don't know. I wasn't expecting anything from this book. I picked it up on a whim. I was going to the beach and I was like, I want a book that is going to give me beachy vibes. So I picked up Beach Read, obviously. And I went into it knowing that it's not like a stereotypical romance. It's not going to give me that. So I already had my expectations as like a realistic standard. So I went into it knowing what to expect. And still, it broke the absolute living fuck out of me. It just, I don't know. I can't explain it. It was so good. It's one of my new favorite books of all time. It's in like the top 5. This book, I don't know how to explain it. It was so good. Basically, it's a rivals to lovers romance, but it definitely kind of reads as a mixture between a romance and a literary fiction novel, which kind of fits because that's the entire plot of the book. The main character, January, she is a romance writer, and she ends up going to the beach house that her dead father left for her. And she has some kind of like mixed feelings about her dad at the moment, because despite how much she loved him and how she felt like he was such a good father, she finds out that he was having an affair while her mother was battling with cancer. So it's kind of this huge deal for her, and she ends up going to this beach house, and lo and behold, her neighbor is actually her college rival. And he ended up being an author as well, but he writes literary fiction. So when they meet each other again, they end up striking this bargain to see whether January can write literary fiction and if Augustus can write a romance novel. So they kind of go on all these little like dates where they do like the literary fiction stuff and then the romance stuff. It's so cute. I absolutely loved this book. It was both cute and heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, and it just ripped out all of my insides and threw them in my face and was like, haha, look at you, you're crying like a little baby. I loved this book so much. If you haven't read it, go read it. Go listen to Folklore by Taylor Swift while you read this book. It is 100% a folklore novel, just 100%. No book besides The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is more folklore than this book. So take with that as you will. And go read this book, go enjoy it, bring a box of tissues with you, and just thank me when you're done. And the very last book that I read for the month of June was Heavy by Keith Lehman. This is an American memoir, and I rated this book 4 out of 5 stars. So this one was kind of hard to rate, and also I don't know how to review it necessarily, because with a memoir, you can't really rate or review the content of the book, because then you're just passing judgment on somebody's life, and that feels really weird to me. I don't want to do that, so I'm not necessarily going to talk about that so much. However, I will give a huge billboard sign trigger warning for fat phobia and eating disorders. I didn't really know how far it was gonna go before I went into it. All I did was read the back of the novel, which says, in this powerful and provocative memoir, Keith Lehman fearlessly explores what the weight of a lifetime of secrets, lies, and deceptions does to a black body, a black family, and a nation teetering on the brink of moral collapse. From his early experiences to his life as a college professor, Lehman charts his complex relationship with his family, weight, sex, gambling, and writing. Defiant, vulnerable, and insightful, Heavy names secrets Lehman spent a lifetime avoiding, and asks all of us to confront the terrifying possibility that few of us know how to responsibly love. So I knew that it was going to talk about his weight amongst other topics. I just didn't know how prevalent the fat phobia was going to be within this novel without ever being checked. Because there is also racism in this novel, and the racism is checked. There's sexism in this novel, the sexism is checked. There's abuse in this novel, the abuse is checked. There's homophobia in this novel and transphobia in this novel, and both of those things are also checked. However, the fat phobia never goes checked. It never really goes confronted. It's always just upheld. So that was something I wasn't necessarily expecting with this novel. So I wish I would have known that going into it, so I'm just telling you that now. I still think that you should read it unless you're going to be heavily triggered by those things. If you're not going to be, I 100% recommend this book. I felt like it was so insightful. It was so much like the title says, it was very heavy, but I just love the way that Keith Lehman was able to write this memoir. It just felt like he was sitting across from you and telling you his life story, and it was just so beautifully written. The only reason I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars is because of the intense fat phobia and intense like promotion of eating disorders, basically. That I didn't absolutely love. I would have been fine with it if it had been checked the way that the other things in this book were, but it just wasn't, so that was unfortunate. However, I am really excited to read literally anything that Keith Lehman puts out next, because his writing was so much fun to read. It was so engaging, and I really recommend this book if you are fine with the trigger warnings. Alright, so those were a lot of books that I talked about. For some reason, I just decided to talk for like over half an hour about the books that I read in June, and I hope you all enjoyed it, because who knows when the next time I'll read 9 books in a month is. Also, if you want to know what I'm currently reading, I am reading Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino, and this is a collection of essays. It is a nonfiction. I got it from TikTok. So yeah, that's what I'm currently reading. I am debating whether or not I'm going to do a TBR for this month. I don't think I'm going to. I think we're going to try to just wing it for this month. I haven't really been sticking to a TBR lately, and I'm starting to wonder how helpful they are. So this month I think we're not going to do a TBR, so there's not going to be a TBR portion of this video. I'm not going to post like a separate TBR video. So we'll see how that goes for this month. If I don't like it, we'll go back to TBRs in August, but for July, no TBRs. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Let me know down below in the comments what you read for the month of June, if you liked what you read, if you didn't like what you read. Also, let me know if you've read any of the books that I've read in June, if you liked them as well. And also don't forget to subscribe to this video, give it a like. Also go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All the links are down below in the description. And I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you.